all keeping well. I was hoping to get all 3 of these installments out to you as quick as I could. I know it's been a couple weeks. Life's just been absolutely hectic between the farm and kids, and real life sometimes just gets away on you. So I'm going to try and hammer through this one here today. I will get the 3rd installment out to you before the end of the week, so I will still have all 3 of these put together for you before Spring Bear kicks off here April 1st, which is not next Saturday, but the Saturday after. So I will have this package all put together for you, and hopefully this will help get you out in the woods and get you going. So last time we touched on the gear, what you can spend money on, what you shouldn't spend money on, and kind of gave you the bare bones to what would get you out and get you going. What we're going to touch on this time here is scouting, basic animal sign, and we will touch a little bit on animal identification. Most of that stuff you would have done in your core and your hunter ed course, but we'll kind of touch on everything and bring it all back together for you and get you guys with one package that you can kind of hit the mountains with and hopefully be successful. So stay tuned. Okay, so the first thing we're going to touch on is e-scouting. Now, e-scouting is something that you can do from home over the winter when the weather's crummy, in the springtime when everything's still slow to kick off. It's something that you can do to basically make sure you've got all the pieces of the puzzle together before you head out there. I mean, especially right now, gas is getting expensive. Time's not always easy to find. So if there's stuff that you can do at home without actually leaving and driving around aimlessly and wasting a bunch of time and fuel, it's a good place for you guys to start. And there's a lot of resources that are either free or very close to that you can use at home to get yourself squared away and get going on this. So one of the big things we're going to talk about is using programs like Google Maps, Google Earth. Those are basically invaluable for being able to get a bird's eye view on the terrain that you're looking at, for the stuff that you're looking at. And one of the things you want to be looking for specifically is south-facing slopes, and you're going to hear a lot of people bring those up, and a lot of people don't understand why. In springtime, that's one of the first places that greens up. Obviously, that gets the most sunlight, so the snow's going to melt off of there first, and you're going to get grass growing there first. But that's going to carry on through the year, so that's always going to be one of the places that sees the most amount of sun throughout the season, and you're going to get a bit of what I'd call a microclimate kind of going on there. You're going to get a little bit different vegetation, you're going to get more of it, and you're going to find that animals tend to congregate there a little bit more than they will on other slopes. Key thing that you're looking for, so you're looking for food sources and you're looking for water sources. Those are the 2 main things, and then coupled with those, you're going to be looking for where those animals are going to find a safe place to bed. So if you took, let's say, an avalanche chute or an alpine meadow, for instance, and you take that, and so you've got an area where you've got a fair amount of feed growing that maybe isn't growing on the rocky surfaces around it or the trees around it. And then you get a band of trees that kind of runs through it, and you may have a creek that flows through that, or you may have some runoff. So you've got a water source and you've got a food source. To assume that you're going to find animals in that stand of trees that's right tucked in there, they're going to try and stick close to those food sources. So that's something that you want to be looking for. Once you've found the area that you want to focus on, the other thing you want to focus on is figuring out how to access that area. So try not to look for things that are right on the end of a road. You don't want necessarily a road that leads right into the area that you want to hunt, because it's going to be easy for everybody else to access, and it's going to be an area that's going to have more traffic and more pressure on the animals. A great resource for finding access into areas like that is something like, grab one here, is I've got a Backroads map book. These things are mostly in Canada. I believe they do Washington State as well, but they are absolutely invaluable when it comes to being able to figure out access into certain roads. They're updated constantly. That being said, once you found your access road and you found the area that you want to hunt, also when you go in there, go in earlier. Don't wait until hunting season to go in there and have a look at it, because things change. You get the freshet in the spring, you get a lot of runoff. It's very probable that some roads have washed out, so you may not be able to access what you think you can access. So go in, make sure that you've got access to the areas that you've been scouting out, and put some boots on the ground. And I mean, you're going to hear me say this again and again, there is no substitute for boots on the ground. You're just not going to be able to scout an area effectively from the truck. You're going to have to get out and put some boots on the ground. Walk around the cut blocks. I like to walk 5 to 15 feet on the inside of the tree line when I'm moving around a cut block, and you're going to be looking in there for sign. Not necessarily out in the wide open, but kind of off to the side. always try and get off the road a little bit. Now you might hear some people mention what they like to call the one mountain over rule. Now what that means is try not to hunt right on the road access, because again, like I said, it's going to be one of the areas that receives the most amount of pressure and sees the most amount of people. So although yeah, you will probably see some animals there, you're not going to see the quantity or the quality of animals that you'll see farther in the tree line. So once you get off the tree or off the road line into the tree line, you'll notice it opens up a lot more than you think it does, and there's a lot more trails and a lot more to see than you might think there is from the road. So a lot of the guys will tell you, hunt the next mountain over, because that gives you a bit of a buffer between the traffic area and where you want to hunt. The key is basically the more you can separate yourself from the high traffic areas, the better odds you're likely to have, because you're going to put yourself in a position where the animals are more relaxed, they're not as pressured. Okay, now we're going over basic animal sign. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus mainly on bears and deer, because those are the species that 90% of hunters start with. So although these points here will be a little more specific to those, you can take this stuff and you can transfer it over once you start hunting moose or elk or goats, really any other animal species that you're going to target. You'll be able to take this stuff, transfer it over, and it will translate 80 to 90% over to that with some minor tweaking. So for bears, you're going to find the number one sign that you're going to be looking for is bear scat. They leave surprisingly little sign for an animal that's the size that they are. So you're not likely to see a lot of tracks. I mean, absolutely look where there's softer ground, a little bit of wet ground. You are going to notice some tracks there, but they seem to be very keen about not leaving marks if they can avoid it. So the number one thing you're going to be looking for is scat. Now what I like to do, especially during the spring, is I'll drive around, cover as much ground as I can until I start to see some sign. When I start to see piles of scat, that's when I'm going to park, I'm going to get out, and then I'm going to walk a specific area. The other thing you're going to be looking for is where those animals are eating. So bears, and again, specifically in the spring, this is kind of what I'm going to focus on just because that's what we're going into right now. But when they come out of hibernation, a lot of what they're eating is what we like to call fireweeds that are growing on the side of those old deactivated logging roads and those FSRs, and that's why you find them there and you find them out in the open. So you're going to walk around, look down, and you'll notice that the tops of those longer leaves have been chewed off. You're going to see little nubs, kind of normally a little bit damp on top. They look a little scrunched up. That's what you're watching for, and that's what they're eating as they go along. And in the fall, you're going to be looking for blueberry bushes, raspberry bushes on the side of the road. Those things there where you'll see the bushes, but you won't find any berries on them, and that's things that they've been munching away on. So you're also going to find that bears are very reactive to the temperature of the area around them. So earlier in the season, when it's cooler out, you're going to find that they tend to spend more time on those slopes in the sun, sunning themselves in the middle of the day, trying to get some warmth and some heat going. Whereas it starts to get warmer, you're going to start finding them more to the shoulder ends of the day. You're going to find them closer to the early hours in the morning. You're going to find them more in the afternoon. I find ideally my best success comes between 4 p.m. and dusk is when I tend to see the most bears. And as it gets warmer, you're also going to look for them in shaded draws, areas that have got a fair amount of shade, creek bottoms, places where there's a bit of a breeze going. Now with deer, you're going to be looking for the same thing, essentially. You're going to be looking for piles of scat, and with deer, you're going to be looking for the density of scat in a particular area. So if you may see one pile here, one pile there, but if you start to see multiple piles in a small area, odds are pretty good that you're close to a bedding area or you're close to a feeding area where they're spending a fair bit of time when they're congregating. So these are areas that you're going to want to focus on, you're going to want to spend a little more time examining. Now ironically, deer being smaller animals tend to leave more tracks. They're heavier footed with their hooves, they're not padded like a bear's. So they're going to leave tracks. So you're going to be looking for deer tracks a lot more often than you'll be looking for something like a bear track. Now, deer tracks, it's not just important to be able to recognize the deer track, it's also important to be able to understand what that track is trying to tell you. So when you're looking at a deer track, they're going to look like two semicolons. They're going to be pointed at one end, they're going to kind of round out at the other end. So they're always going to be pointed in the direction that deer is heading. So when you're looking at the track, make sure you understand which direction that deer is going, because it's going to tell you whether it's coming or going from a specific area that you're working on. And then the other thing you're going to watch for on those tracks, especially when the ground's a little bit softer, you're going to notice that they'll leave marks for what's called a dew claw. Dew claws generally is what bucks have. The rear of their foot, you're going to notice where that wider part is at the back of the heel, there's going to be two dots that almost look like two fingerprints in behind that. and that's going to give you an indication that that is a buck that you're tracking and not a doe. So those are things that you want to watch out for, because that's going to help you understand whether you're tracking an animal that you're potentially able to target, or whether you are tracking an animal that may lead you to one of those animals, but it's going to help you focus your energy. Now, you'll be hunting deer in the fall, and that coincides with the deer rut. So one of the other things you'll be looking for if you're hunting deer during the rut is you're going to be looking for scrapes and rubs. That is your number one indicator that you've got a buck in the area that's marking his territory and that's on the prowl looking for does and to fend off other bucks and defend his territory. So if you find an area that has a rub in it, try and gauge the age of that rub. So if that tree looks like the bark has just been rubbed off of it, you'll generally see that there may still be some remnants on the ground underneath of it, and it'll generally still be a little bit damp because it's bringing some of that moisture out of the tree now that it's been opened up. That'll tell you that that's a very fresh rub, and that's an area that you want to focus on and keep an eye on. If you notice an older rub that maybe is dried out, the wood looks a lot darker, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to pay attention to that area, because deer tend to be creatures of habit. So oftentimes they will go back to certain areas year after year. Also remember that for deer, there are different species of deer, and that those species of deer behave differently. So I tend to find that whitetail pattern, maybe not necessarily easier, but they pattern better than mule deer or blacktail deer. They tend to use the same trail over and over again, and unless they've been disturbed or pushed, they oftentimes tend to use it around the same time frame. So it makes getting into the right spot and setting that right ambush a lot easier than it might be to set up for a mule deer or a blacktail deer. Now, muleys and blacktail deer also tend to use the same general areas for trails, but I find they tend to have 3, 4, maybe even 5 different trails. So that makes it a little bit harder to set up the exact ambush depending on whether you're archery hunting or rifle hunting, whatever the case may be. And they tend to mix up their times, I find. They're not always through there at the same time. But keep an eye out for game trails, because that's the corridors that you're going to want to focus on. Most animals will tend to use the same game corridors, and that's what you want to focus on and focus your attention on. Okay, now lastly, we're going to touch on basic animal identification. So this is stuff that you should have gone through in your core course or in your hunter education course, but it's something that if you haven't been practicing it, you may have gotten a little bit rusty on. So we're just going to do a quick refresher on it and make sure that you guys are dialed in. So when it comes to bears, the most likely 2 bear species that you'll find in the same area that you might be hunting, I know that's the case for me, are grizzly and black bear. Now, it's important to be able to tell the difference, especially here in British Columbia, since there is no open season on grizzly bears. Black bears do come in different color phases, so color isn't necessarily the best indicator for telling the difference. So you'll find grizzlies generally happen to have a hump between their shoulders where that big ball of muscle builds up. Black bears may have a little bit of a hump, or generally no hump at all. The other thing you'll notice is grizzly bears have a very dished face compared to black bears. The other thing you want to be able to do is make sure that you can tell the tracks apart, because the last thing you want to do is be tracking the wrong bear into the wrong area. So grizzly bear tracks, you'll notice that the claw marks are very pronounced, and they tend to be farther away from the toe than a black bear track. And you're also going to notice that those toes are very close together, whereas black bear tracks, you're going to notice those toes are more splayed out, and those claw marks, they may not always be there, and when they are there, they're definitely going to be a lot closer to the toe than a grizzly track. Now, the other important thing with bears is being able to tell the difference between a sow and a boar. Now, a sow is generally going to have a lot narrower face, longer nose, the ears are going to be significantly bigger and generally closer together. Boars are going to have more of a pumpkin head, the ears are going to be a little bit shorter, and they're going to be farther out to the sides. Body-wise, you'll also notice that sows tend to be more bum-high, whereas boars tend to be more shoulder-high and wider in the chest. So the big thing is you want to make sure that you spend enough time watching the bear that you're going to harvest to make sure that it is not in the company of cubs. They may not always be right with it, so do take that extra time. Try to be sure. When it comes to deer, they're going to be split up into 2 groups. Essentially, muleys and blacktails will be bunched together. They're very, very similar in appearance. And whitetails will be bunched into another group. Now, the easiest way to tell the difference between the two is mule deer tend to have significantly bigger ears than whitetails do. And muley antlers tend to fork. So you're going to notice that they're going to come up, they're going to fork, and then they're going to fork off of that again. And they can either go very tall or they can basket out a bit. Whereas whitetails have one main beam that'll wrap around, it'll make a very noticeable basket, and all the other tines are going to pop out of that main beam. The other thing you're going to notice is with their rumps, muleys tend to have much whiter rumps, almost like an elk, whereas whitetails tend to be a lot browner rump, but then have a very pronounced white flag underneath that tail. And when they spook and they do run on you, that tail will come up as a warning to other deer and to you, and that's where the term getting flagged by a deer comes from. And like I said, 90% of you guys are going to remember this stuff from your hunter education course, but it's just important to always reiterate it. Be 100% sure about what you're going after, and always be certain of what you're targeting, right? All right, guys, I'm going to wrap that up there. It's always a bit of a juggling act to figure out how to keep this as short as possible while making sure that I don't cut any corners and get you guys the information that you really need to kind of get out of these things. But hopefully that's been done. So if you do like this content, if you find it useful, like, subscribe. That helps get us out in the algorithms and really helps the channel grow. So again, thank you guys for your support. Hopefully this is useful, and we'll catch you guys out there. Thanks again.